Stock car racing is a form of automobile racing found mainly and most prominently in the United States and Canada, with Australia and New Zealand also having forms of stock car auto racing. Traditionally, races are run on oval tracks measuring approximately 0.25 to 2.66 miles. The world's largest governing body for stock car racing is the American NASCAR, and its Sprint Cup Series is the premier top-level series of professional stock car racing. Top-level races typically range between 200 to 600 miles in length. Top-level stock cars reach speeds in excess of 200 miles per hour at speedway tracks and on superspeedway tracks such as Daytona International Speedway and Talladega Superspeedway. Contemporary NASCAR spec top-level cars produce maximum power outputs of 860 to 900 horsepower from the naturally aspirated V8 engines. In October 2007, American race car driver Russ Wicks set a speed record for stock cars in a 2007 season Dodge Charger built to NASCAR specifications, by achieving a maximum speed of 244.9 miles per hour at the Bonneville Salt Flats. For the 2015 NASCAR Sprint Cup Series season, power output of the competing cars ranged from 750 to 800 horsepower. Stock cars. A stock car, in the original sense of the term, is an automobile that has not been modified from its original factory configuration. Later, the term stock car came to mean any production-based automobile used in racing. This term is used to differentiate such a car from a race car, a special, custom-built car designed only for racing purposes. The actual degree to which the cars conform to standard model specs has changed over the years and varies from country to country. Today, most American stock cars may superficially resemble standard American family sedans, but are in fact purpose-built racing machines built to a strict set of regulations governing the car design, ensuring that the chassis, suspension, engine, etc. are architecturally identical on all vehicles. For example, the NASCAR Sprint Cup Series now requires fuel injection. The closest European equivalent to stock car racing is probably touring car racing. In the UK and New Zealand there is a racing formula called stock cars, but the cars are markedly different from any road car one might see. In Australia there was a formula that was quite similar to NASCAR called a USCAR. The race car Euro Series began in 2009 and was sanctioned by NASCAR as a touring series in 2012, currently operating as the NASCAR Well and Euro Series classes. There are several classes of stock car racing, each with slightly different rules, but the key intention of cars that look like production cars but with near identical specifications underneath remains true. Street stock and pure stock. True stock car racing, which consists of only street vehicles that can be bought by general public, is sometimes now called street stock, pure stock, hobby stock, showroom stock, or U-car racing. In 1972, SCCA started its first showroom stock racing series, with a price ceiling on the cars of $3,000. Some modern showroom stock racing allows safety modifications done on showroom stock cars. Super stock classes are similar to street stock, but allow for more modifications to the engine. Power output is usually in the range of 500 to 550 horsepower. Tire width is usually limited to 8 in. Some entry-level classes are called street stock, and are similar to what is often called banger racing in England. Late models are usually the highest class of stock cars in local racing. Rules for construction of a late model car vary from region to region and even racetrack to racetrack. The most common variations include super late models, late model stock cars, and limited late models. A late model model may be a custom-built machine or a heavily modified street car. Individual sanctioning bodies maintain their own late model rule books, and even individual racetracks can maintain their own rule books, meaning a late model that is legal in one series or at one track may not be legal at another without modifications. The National Touring Series, the NASCAR Late Model Sportsman Division, originated from a local late model races in the east coast of the U.S. This division was later called the Busch Series, the Nationwide Series, and the Xfinity Series, as its title sponsor changed. Early years. In the 1920s, moonshine runners during the Prohibition era would often have to outrun the authorities. To do so, they had to upgrade their vehicles and eventually started getting together with fellow runners and making runs together. They would challenge one another and eventually progress to organized events in the early 1930s. The main problem racing faced was the lack of a unified set of rules among the different tracks. When Bill France saw this problem, he set up a meeting at the Streamline Hotel in order to form an organization that would unify the rules. When NASCAR was first formed by Bill France, Sr. in 1948 to regulate stock car racing in the U.S., there was a requirement that any car entered be made entirely of parts available to the general public through automobile dealers. Additionally, the cars had to be models that had sold more than 500 units to the public. This is referred to as homologation. In NASCAR's early years, the cars were so stock that it was commonplace for the drivers to drive themselves to the competitions in the car that they were going to run in. The race, while automobile engine technology had remained fairly stagnant in World War II, advanced aircraft piston engine development had provided a great deal of available data, and NASCAR was formed just as some of the improved technology was about to become available in production cars. Until the advent of the Trans Am Series in 1967, NASCAR homologation cars were the closest thing that the public could buy that was actually very similar to the cars that were winning the national races. The 1949 Oldsmobile Rocket V8 with a displacement of 303 cu/in is widely recognized as the first post-war modern overhead valve engine to become available to the public. The Oldsmobile was an immediate success in 1949 and 1950, and all the automobile manufacturers could not help noticing the higher sales of the Oldsmobile 88 to the buying public. The motto of the day became "Win on Sunday, sell on Monday." However, in spite of the fact that several competing engines were more advanced, the aerodynamic and low-slung Hudson Hornet managed to win in 1951, 1952, and 1953 with a 308 cu/in inline six-cylinder that used an old-style flathead engine, proving there was more to winning than just a more powerful engine. At the time, it typically took 3 years for a new design of car body or engine to end up in production and be available for NASCAR racing. Most cars sold to the public did not have a wide variety of engine choices, and the majority of the buying public at the time were not interested in the large displacement special edition engine options that would soon become popular. However, the end of the Korean War in 1953 started an economic boom, and then car buyers immediately began demanding more powerful engines. Also in 1953, NASCAR recommended that the drivers add roll bars, but did not require them. In 1955, Chrysler produced the C300 with its 300 HP 331 cu/in OHV engine, which easily won in 1955 and 1956. In 1957, several notable events happened. The Automobile Manufacturers Association banned manufacturers from using race wins in their advertising and giving direct support to race teams, as they felt it led to reckless street racing. This forced manufacturers to become creative in producing race parts to help races win. Race teams were often caught trying to use factory-produced racing parts that were not really available to the public, though many parts passed muster by being labeled as heavy-duty police parts. Car manufacturers wanted to appear compliant with the ban, but they also wanted to win. The NASCAR tracks at the time were mainly dirt tracks with modest barriers, and during the 1957 season a Mercury Monterey crashed into the crowd. This killed many spectators, and resulted in a serious overhaul of the safety rules, which in turn prompted the building of larger, more modern tracks. Also in 1957, Chevrolet sold enough of the new fuel-injected engines to the public in order to make them available for racing. But Bill France immediately banned fuel injection and superchargers from NASCAR before they could race. However, even without official factory support of the use of fuel injection, Buck Baker won in 1957 driving a small block V8 Chevrolet Bel Air. In 1961, Ford introduced the F1390 in a low-drag Galaxy Starliner, but 1960 and 61 championships were won by drivers in 409-powered Chevrolet Impalas. Pontiac introduced their Super Duty 421 in Catalinas that made use of many aluminum body parts to save weight, and the Pontiacs easily won in 1962. Golden Age. The desire from fans and manufacturers alike for higher performance cars within the restrictions of homologation meant that carmakers began producing limited production, special edition cars based on high production base models. It also became apparent that manufacturers were willing to produce increasingly larger engines to remain competitive. For the 1963 season, NASCAR engines were restricted to using a maximum displacement of 7.0 liters and using only 2 valves per cylinder. Also, even with heavy-duty special editions sold to the public for homologation purposes, the race car rules were further modified, primarily in the interest of safety. This is because race drivers and their cars during this era were subjected to forces unheard of in street use, and require a far higher level of protection than is normally afforded by truly stock automobile bodies. In 1963, Ford sold enough of their aerodynamic Sport Roof Edition Galaxies to the public so it would qualify as stock, and with the heavy-duty Fay-block board and stroke to the new limit of 427, the top 5 finishes were all Fords. Chrysler had bored the 413 to create the Max Wedge 426, but it still could not compete with the Fords. General Motors headquarters had genuinely tried to adhere to the 1957 ban, but the Chevrolet division had also constantly tried to work around it, because the other manufacturers had openly circumvented the ban. In 1963, GM gave in and openly abandoned compliance, and Chevy was allowed to produce the Z06 427, but it did not immediately enjoy success. Then, in 1964, the new Chrysler 426 Hemi engines dominated the series in a Plymouth Belvedere Sport Fury. The homologation rules were changed so that 1,000 of any engine and car had to be sold to the public to qualify as a stock part, instead of just 500. This made the 426 Hemi unavailable for the 1965 season. In 1965, Ford adapted 2 single overhead cams to the Fay 427 V8 to allow it to run at a higher RPM. Ford started to sell cameras to the public to homologate it. but NASCAR changed the rules to specify that all NASCAR engines must use a single cam in block. But even without the camera, the Ford F427 won in 1965. In 1966, Chrysler sold enough of the 426 HEMAS to make it available again, and they put it in the new Dodge Charger, which had a low-drag rear window that was radically sloped. It was called a fastback, and because of this David Pearson was the series champion that year, with Richard Petty dominating 1967, winning 27 of 48 races in the Boxer Plymouth Belvedere. The 1969 season featured the Ford Torino Talladega, which had enough aerodynamic body improvements that it gave the Torino a higher top speed with no other changes. The Talladega, which was not really a Torino, but actually a Ford Fairlane Cobra with an extended nose and reshaped rockers. Starting in 1963 up till this point, Ford had won 6 straight manufacturer championships, and by the end of the 1969 season Ford would make it 7 in a row. Richard Petty was tired of winning races but losing the championship, so after a private viewing of Ford's new Talladega and Boss 429 engine, he signed a lucrative deal with Ford. Prior to its first race at the Daytona 500, David Pearson's 427-powered Talladega set a new NASCAR record by being the first to exceed 190 miles per hour when he qualified at 190.029 miles per hour. When the race started, Donnie Allison's Talladega led the majority of the race. Towards the end of the race, the Talladega of Leroy Yarborough chased down the Dodge of Charlie Glotzbach, who had an 11-second lead. It was the first Daytona 500 won on a last-lap pass. Things got worse for Dodge when NASCAR, a few months later, finally allowed Ford to run its Hemi-headed Boss 429 engine. With Ford winning the majority of the races, Dodge was forced to develop a better car of their own. Using the Charger 500 as a basis, they added a pointed nose. This nose was almost a carbon copy of the nose on the 1962 Ford Mustang II prototype. This radical body shape required a wing to remain stable at speeds over 180 miles per hour. They named it the Dodge Daytona after the race they hoped to win. Even though it never won a Daytona 500 race, it was still a significant improvement over its predecessor, the Dodge Charger 500. NASCAR feared that these increasing speeds significantly surpassed the abilities of the tire technology of the day, and it would undoubtedly increase the number of gruesome wrecks that were occurring. As a result, the 1970 homologation rules were changed so that one car for every 2 U.S. dealers had to be built for sale to the public to qualify, hoping to delay the use of aero bodies until tires could improve. For the 1970 season, Dodge raced the 1969 model Daytona, but Plymouth managed to build over 1,920 Plymouth Superbirds, which were similarly equipped to the Daytona. Petty came back to Plymouth in the 200-plus mph Superbird, and Bobby Isaac won the season championship in a Daytona. NASCAR restricted all aero cars, including the Ford Talladega, Mercury Spoiler 2, Charger 500, Dodge Daytona and Plymouth Superbird, to a maximum engine displacement of 305 cu. For 1971, almost all teams switched to non-aero body styles. NASCAR eventually adopted a restrictor plate to limit top speeds for the 7.0L engine as teams switched to small block 358 cu. engines. Fans, drivers, and manufacturers alike demanded a complete revamping of the rules. NASCAR responded in a way that they hoped would make the cars safer and more equal, so the race series would be more a test of the drivers, rather than a test of car technology. The era drew to a conclusion in the 1970s. 1972 brought so many rule changes. It has prompted many to consider this year as the start of the modern era of NASCAR racing. In addition, R.J. Reynolds took over as the major sponsor of NASCAR racing, and they made a significantly larger financial contribution than previous sponsors. Richard Petty's personal sponsorship with SDP also set new, higher standards for financial rewards to driving teams. The sudden infusion of noticeably larger amounts of money changed the entire nature of the sport. The 1973 oil crisis meant that large displacement special edition homologation cars of all makes were suddenly sitting unsold. Through the balance of the 1970s until 1992, the factory stock sheet metal over a racing frame meant the cars looked very much like the street version counterparts. It can be said that 1993, with the addition of ground effect wraparound type spoilers, marked the beginning non-stock sheet metal, and from that point forward, stock cars were quickly allowed to differ greatly from anything available to the public. Modern racing stock cars are stock in name only, using a body template that is vaguely modeled after currently available automobiles. The chassis, running gear, and other equipment have almost nothing to do with anything in ordinary automobiles. NASCAR and the auto manufacturers have become aware of this, and for 2013 each brand have redesigned the racing sheet metal to more resemble the street models of the cars.